Look at that juice.
Hey everyone, it's Kenji. It's a beautiful day out here in Seattle. I am on the water on our dock, and we are going to talk about a dozen ways to make your hamburgers better. Tip number one, you want to use freshly ground beef if you can. So I have 2 batches of beef here. One of them I got from the supermarket. I came in one of those little plastic pouches where it's all compressed. And the other one I got from the local butcher. I went to Beast and Cleaver up in Ballard. This is freshly ground chuck. Even just looking at it, you can see the difference. The freshly ground chuck is kind of loose, almost crumbly in appearance, whereas the packaged beef is going to be much more compressed, almost like a clay in texture. The freshly ground stuff is going to have pockets of air, pockets of fat. When you bite into it, you're gonna find these little pockets of juice that spill out into your mouth. Whereas the compressed burger, it's gonna be a little bit tougher, not as juicy. Most supermarkets these days will probably grind the beef for you if you ask them. They all have grinders in the back. So tip number one, use freshly ground beef. Tip number two, you wanna keep everything cold, especially if you're grinding your own beef. What happens if burger meat or any kind of meat starts to get warm is that the fat will start to soften and it can sort of smear out of those patties. By keeping things nice and cold, you're keeping the fat in solid chunks and you're making sure that they stay in there until the time that you cook them. You wanna make sure that your beef came just out of the fridge. You don't wanna let it sit around for too long before you start forming your patties. Otherwise, you're sacrificing fat, and fat is flavor. Tip number three is that you don't wanna futz with your meat too much. So you wanna form your patties as quickly, as gently as possible with as little handling as possible. Ground meat acts very much the same way that bread dough does. The more you sort of work it, the tighter and tighter it becomes. The proteins in there are going to start cross-linking. You're gonna end up with a more sort of sausage-like patty, something that's a little bit tougher, something where you don't get those nice pockets of sort of juice and fat that a really good burger has. When you're forming your patties, form them as quickly and as gently as possible and handle them as little as you can. In fact, one thing that I like to do when I'm forming my patties is rather than picking the meat up directly in my hands, I like to put a little pile of the meat onto a sheet of parchment paper on a tray and kind of form the patties by patting them around without really lifting them up too much. I find that that gives you the most control over the shape and size, as well as making sure that you don't overhandle them. Tip number four, don't salt your beef or add anything to it at all until the patties are formed. I know some people like to add things like onions, parsley, sometimes they'll add breadcrumbs or even eggs to them. For me, if you start adding those things to a burger patty, instead of a burger, it becomes a meatloaf sandwich, you know? So I like to leave everything out of the burger, leave that to the toppings. I like just the pure flavor of the beef, especially if you're getting really nice quality ground beef. If you mix salt into your patties, what happens is that the salt will start to draw out some moisture. It'll also cause some of the proteins in there to unravel so that when you then start to mix it and form your patties, they end up much tougher. We shot a video a couple weeks ago where we threw some salted patties against a tray versus unsalted patties, so you can really see the difference in the texture. So I form my patties and then I season them only on the outside. Tip number five is keep your patties consistent. We're gonna be cooking them all over the same fire, so you wanna make sure that they're all relatively the same size. You can eyeball it and make sure that they're generally the same size. However, if you really want them to be completely consistent, I would use a scale to measure out how much meat exactly that you're putting into each patty. That way you make sure that they all cook at the same rate, they're all done at the same time, and everything is consistent. Tip number six, the shape of your patty matters. Especially when you're cooking a bigger patty, say anything over 5 or 6 ounces, what can happen is that as the burger cooks, the outside edges will cook a little bit faster than the center, and as that happens, they start to shrink and tighten up, which can cause the center to bulge out. So if you've ever had a hamburger like your uncle cooked it at the backyard, and it looks like a softball inside a bun, that's probably because the patty was flat when he started. So when you're making a thick patty, you wanna make a little bit of a dimple in the center of the patty, a little recession so that it's shaped kind of like a giant red blood cell. That way, as it cooks, it evens out and ends up really flat. If you're making a thin patty, on the other hand, I really like thin burgers on the grill as well. If you're making a thin patty, in those cases, it's going to cook relatively evenly, so you want a really nice even shape. The way I like to shape my thin patties is I place the meat between 2 sheets of parchment paper, and then I press down on it with a tray so that I get a nice round, flat, even shape. Tip number 7 is season liberally. You know, there's nothing worse than when you go to a restaurant, you get what looks like a really nice juicy burger, and then you bite into it and it doesn't taste like anything because they didn't season it properly. Salt is a really essential part of flavor. Salt unlocks these neurochemical pathways in our tongue that allow us to actually taste things. So without salt, foods really have very little flavor. A burger, especially because we're not adding any seasoning to the inside, you wanna make sure that the outside is salted really nicely so that you can really taste the flavor of that beef. So I like to season liberally with kosher salt and ground black pepper. Number 8, use a Twozone Fire. So a Twozone Fire is a fire in which the coals are all on one side of the grill and the other side has either none or very few coals. If you're doing it on a gas grill, you want to light up half of those burners on high and leave the other burners on low. The reason we do this is it gives you a little bit of control. You know, when a burger goes on top of the hot part of a grill, we're using beef that's about 20% fat. That fat's gonna soften, start to render and drip down. And what can happen, I'm sure you've all seen this happen at a backyard barbecue, you could end up with like this big inferno of flames that engulfs the meat. It deposits this kind of sooty residue on it that makes it taste burnt as opposed to charred and delicious. So when that starts to happen, what I do is I either shift the burger over to the cooler side of the grill or I spin the griddle. If I'm on a round grill like this one, I can just spin the entire grill grate around so that the burgers are over the cooler side of the grill. It also, if you're cooking a big thick burger, it also gives you a little bit more control. So let's say the outside of your burger is getting really nice and browned and charred, but you take the temperature and you see that it's still almost completely raw in the center. If you have a two-zone fire, you can then shift those burgers over to the cooler side of the grill, pop the lid on and let them continue cooking till they're as done as you like them. So a two-zone fire is a really essential technique for cooking good burgers. Tip number 9, make sure you get good browning on your beef. Browning is flavor. The Maillard reaction is a cascade of chemical reactions that occur when you heat proteins. Proteins break down into sort of smaller building blocks and then they recombine to form hundreds of new flavor compounds. So the more browning that you have on your burger, the more flavor you're gonna get. With a big thick burger, it's pretty easy to get good browning because it's gonna spend some time over the fire there before it gets to your whatever level of doneness you want it to get to. With a thinner burger, it's a little bit more difficult because if you try and brown both sides, what happens is the burger ends up drying out by the time it's done. So with a thinner burger, what I recommend doing is letting it sit on one side and get really, really great browning on that one side, and then flip it over, let the second side just kind of touch the flame for a second to get that sort of rawness out of it, but really concentrate about 90% on that one side. Thick burgers, let them cook on both sides. Thin burgers, one side only. Number 10, use a thermometer. If you're a grill cook, a line cook at a restaurant and you're cooking dozens or hundreds of burgers a day, poking the patty with your finger is maybe the way you can tell how it's done. However, most of us don't get to do that. We're gonna be cooking burgers maybe a few times a year, so we don't really get that experience built into our fingers. So the best way to tell if your burger is done to your liking is to use a thermometer. I aim for around 120 degrees for medium rare, or a little bit below medium rare, 130 degrees for the upper end of medium rare, and above that, you're gonna start to get into well done territory. Once you've hit 160 degrees, you're gonna be sort of gray and well done all the way through, which is, if that's how you like your burger, so be it. Number 11, you want to choose your bun wisely. So there are a number of bun options available at the supermarket. You know, if you go with your typical sort of real cheap generic white hamburger bun, I think that's a great choice for certain types of burgers, especially if you're doing sort of a thinner burger that's not going to have a ton of juices coming out. The problem with these is though, if you try and use them for a thicker burger, they can end up sort of saturating and falling apart before you're done eating. So for a thicker burger, I would recommend something a little bit heartier. So these are brioche style buns that you can get at virtually any supermarket these days. You know, true brioche I think is not quite the right choice for a burger. It's a little bit too sort of spongy and firm, but these brioche style burger buns, I find them to be sort of like a hybrid between a brioche and a hamburger bun these days. And I think these are a great choice for a thicker burger. So for thin burgers, generic white buns. For thicker burgers, something a little bit heartier. The final tip, number 12, don't let anybody tell you what to do with your toppings. You know, toppings I think are completely personal choice, and in fact, my topping choices change from day to day. So sometimes I like the full complement of lettuce, tomato, onions, and pickles. At the very basic level, I prefer just onions and pickles, which someone could say that at Shake Shack, for example, where lettuce and tomato comes as the standard topping, you could say that they made the completely wrong choice. But I'm not gonna say that because that's a personal choice of theirs. The other thing I like to do is I like to put my toppings underneath my burger. I'm more of a bottomings kind of guy. So whether you are a top or a bottom, the choice is yours, and it's all about personal choice and consent. So whether you like your burgers big and fat with bottomings or thin and plain Jane, I hope that these tips will help you improve them. And maybe you already knew everything I talked about here, and if so, congratulations, you're already eating good burgers. All right, I'm gonna take a bite of my burger. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, we'll see you next time. Oh, if you want more burger recipes, I have a bunch on my YouTube. I also have a bunch on my Patreon, and you can find the recipes for these burgers on my Patreon, which is completely free. You'll find the links in the description below. All right, see you later. Woo. Look at that juice. Hey everyone, thank you for watching the video. If you're going to be in Seattle this July 25th, you can catch Tasting Notes, which is my live stage show, multi-sensory stage show, involving the musicians of the Seattle Chamber Music Society, as well as some of Seattle's best chefs. There's going to be live demos, there'll be music, there'll be discussion, there'll be tasting. We're all going to have a good time, including pizza from Moto Pizza. So that's at Benaroya Hall, July 25th, 7 p.m. Tickets are available in the description below.